October 29th, 2005. Item number 100. Today's guest is Jeff, a podcast listener.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Hi, this is Clinton from Comedy Forecast. Congratulations, Rob, on reaching, open caret, 100 items, close caret, of Podcast 411. Seriously though, Rob, you do a great job of keeping everyone in the podcasting community in the loop. I know there's a lot of us out here who turn to Podcast 411 to help us get started, and we stay subscribed to hear what others in the podosphere are doing and thinking. Keep up the great work.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. I first would like to thank Clinton for that introductory congratulations on us reaching our 100th show. And here's a scary thought. At roughly 10 hours of work per show and 100 shows, that's 1,000 hours of work. Or, related another way, 25 40-hour weeks. Ouch. Well, anyway, I've been having a blast. I enjoy doing it as much now as I did at show number 1 or 2. Actually, more so, because the audio quality is much better. I have another congratulatory voicemail that I want to play. Here we go.
Hello, Rob. I have enjoyed listening to the Podcast 411 for a while now. Give us what we really want for your 100th episode. A naked video cast? It's what your audience wants and needs.
Today's show is sponsored by Acme Crowbars. Acme Crowbars, where you can pry that mental image right out of your head. I have no idea who sent that in, but thank you. There will be no naked video casts anytime in the near future. Now, as this is a Saturday show, we are going to stick with our tradition of Saturday shows having tech tips from Michael Carino from the Digital MediaCast Experiment. Here we go.
This is Michael Carino from DigitalMediaCastExperiment.com with another Podcast 411 tech tip. Have you ever wanted to fake a phone call on your podcast? Short of calling yourself on the phone using the Digital MediaCast Experiment OSTI 81000 phone interface we talked about in an earlier show, this is the next best thing. First, record what you have to say. Next, eliminate the low end of your dynamic range. The best way to do this is either with a graphic equalizer or a low-pass filter. Cut off everything below 500 Hz. We do this because you don't get much bass from those tiny little telephone speakers. Lastly, eliminate all of the high end above 2000 Hz. In the old days, the microphone speakers and the electronics couldn't handle these high frequencies. These days, there are other limitations at play, but if you do the math, you'll find out this is why you never get much more than 32 kilobytes per second over a modem. Now this sounds like a telephone. Let's see if it works. Hello? Rob? This is your listenership calling. Would you stop with this tech tip and get on with the interview? Oh yeah, and thank you for letting me talk to your audience.
Michael, as always, thank you for the tech tip. If any of you listeners out there would like to contribute your own tech tip or rant, please send them to podcast411@gmail.com. Also, if you have any audio comments you'd like to send us, please call 206-666-HELP. That's 206-666-4357. Now, for today's show, we're doing something completely new and different, and it was what you, the listeners, chose. And that is we're going to interview a fellow podcast listener, but not someone who has done a podcast. I need to preface, this interview was done with Jeff. He's in Florida, and Jeff had just been hit by Hurricane Wilma this past week. He had no electricity. So we needed to do this interview Skype out to his Trio phone. So this is Skype out to a cell phone. Jeff will not be getting his power back until sometime in mid to late November. That's another month. Ouch. And a little bit else about Jeff. I can't mention what company Jeff works for, his last name, but Jeff is a CEO of a technology company, publicly traded company, and we mentioned him a little bit in the interview I did with Keith and the girl. We'll talk a little bit more about Jeff's background in the interview, but here we go with the interview. Here's Jeff. Enjoy. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure. As a longtime listener, it's really a pleasure and an honor to have a chance to talk to you.
I will start you out with the traditional first question. What was your first computer?
My first computer was a Commodore 64, which I know many people have said. But I had mine souped up as much as you could possibly soup up a Commodore 64, and I even had a 6-cartridge expansion cartridge that you would stick in the back so that you could pseudo-multitask by pushing a button and instantly killing the memory of one cartridge and inserting another cartridge into the computer's memory by just pushing a button. So jumping from one application or one game to another.
Prior to 1994, were you with Trauma Films?
Yes, that's correct. So that was part of my entertainment background. So I worked at Trauma for 7 years.
Class of Nukem High 3.
Yeah, Class of Nukem High. I was one of the co-writers of Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD. We also took, in addition to the traditional sort of Trauma-style movie, we took the Toxic Avenger while I was there and turned him into a Saturday morning cartoon show. So we did a spin-off called The Toxic Crusaders, which was based on the Toxic Avenger. Yeah. And I actually wrote several episodes of the Toxic Crusaders cartoon series, and then set up a licensing and merchandising division for Trauma, and ended up doing 70 deals worldwide with, Playmates Toys and Marvel Comics and Sega and Nintendo. And it was actually through that licensing and merchandising business that I ended up sort of getting more involved in technology, dealing with Sega, Nintendo, on our computer games. And actually, once we were doing the licensing and merchandising for the Trauma titles, I realized it would be easy to get other properties, so I started looking for properties to acquire, and I ended up getting the licensing and merchandising rights to Reading Rainbow, the show on PBS with Bob Burton. And it was one of the greatest coups in my career to date to have the same company that brought you the Toxic Avenger be representing the Emmy Award-winning show on PBS, Reading Rainbow. It was a Reading Rainbow deal that I did with a company in Florida that ended up leading me to Florida, because I ended up liking the guys and liking that industry, and one thing led to another, and an opportunity arose, and that's when I moved to Florida to join the same company that we had licensed Reading Rainbow to for CD-ROM games back in 1993, 94.
Let's talk about podcasting here. And what was the first podcast you listened to, and what podcasts are you listening to now?
I think that the first podcast I listened to was probably Adam Curry's Daily Source Code, but very soon thereafter I added the Dawn and Drew show. Was pretty early on. Also, I read an article about Scott Sigler's first podcast-only novel, Earthcore, and immediately jumped on that, liking entertainment and reading and just being interested in the introduction of yet another medium to the podcast format. I subscribed to Earthcore, prior to the first episode being publicly available, and followed that with great enjoyment, throughout its run. And I'm current, well, it was current until the storm hit with his latest novel, Ancestor. Currently, I have probably close to 50 podcasts that I stay current with, everything from, 5 Minutes with Wichita to your show, of course, the ones I've mentioned already. My sons and I are big Keith and the Girl fans. We enjoy their show very much, and I think they do a great job putting it out on a regular basis, always entertaining.
We mentioned you in that Keith and the Girl interview.
That's right. I heard that. That was a kick. My son got a real kick out of that.
I'm looking forward to meeting Keith and Hemda at the show.
They are extremely talented. I mean, of all the shows I listen to, because they're genuinely funny, they're totally committed. They put on a regular show. They get it right. In my book, they get it right on all fronts. I think they do a great job.
I agree. They are so talented, and for them to do that hour every day, and for it to be so engaging.
And it never feels stale. Never feels stale. So we enjoy Keith and the Girl. I listen to a couple, but not many, of sort of the non-indie podcasts. I do listen to Ebert and Roper, because I never watched their show, quite frankly, but it's a great way to get a taste of their reviews in a few minutes through the podcast. That brought a new audience to them, not to their show, but to their podcast. I listen to the Engadget podcast, Evil Genius Chronicles, Geek News Central, the Gilmore Gang. I listen to both of the wine shows, Winecast and Grape Radio, Eat Feed, Morning Coffee Notes when they come out, although they're fairly sporadic these days. On the music side, I listen to No Idle Frets, Coverville, of course. Coverville was actually one of the first ones I listened to because it really struck a note with me, and I've always meant to write something to Brian Ibbott, and I never did. But when I first became an Apple iTunes user, one of the first joys I found in that service was how easy it was to find covers of songs. And long before I heard of Coverville, I had always had playlists of my own called, Cover Up and other puns with the word cover, where I would just find as many covers as I could find for a particular song I liked on iTunes and download them and then add them to that playlist. So I thought the concept behind Coverville was terrific, and Brian puts out a great show. So Coverville is one of my early podcasts, and I listen to regularly. Your show I mentioned, of course, which has been a great source of finding new shows to listen to. On the odd side, I listen to the Paranormal Podcast, which is interesting from time to time, Distorted View from time to time.
I would imagine your kids enjoyed Distorted View a little bit also.
I drew the line there. I introduced them to Keith and the Girl with Vim and Verve, and I haven't really mentioned Distorted View yet.
Tim's is as out there as you can get. You know, that might be parental abuse if someone found out you were letting them listen to it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough that they have to know about the Wednesday fanfare on Keith and the Girl, but I'm not sure they're ready for the Tuesday fanfare on Distorted View.
Yeah.
And obviously, anyone who listens to those shows will know exactly what I'm talking about. I needn't sodden your show with that stuff, Rob.
No, we won't talk about it here. If you want to find out what's special about Tuesday on Tim's show and Wednesday on Keith and Hemda's show, go tune in and check them out.
You know, one of the things that I really enjoy about podcasting as a listener is that sense of community, is that when you listen to one show and you hear someone mention another show, and if it strikes a nerve, you can listen to it. And most of the better podcasts give you that sense of community in the shows themselves. You get a sense that you know the podcaster, you know a little bit about their life, you've shared some personal things on your show from time to time, and most of the podcasters seem to do that. And I think that that's really attractive to a listener. I mean, I think that when I lived in New York and when I first moved to Florida, before they took him off the air, I was an avid Howard Stern fan, and I've had the opportunity to meet Howard a few times, and he's a good guy in person, too. And I think, as a listener, the real attraction to his show was never really as much the comedy or the humor as much as it was that he brought you into his family. If you became a regular listener, you felt like you knew what he was doing, you knew Robin, you knew Gary, you knew, Stuttering John and all the cast of characters, and it was a very communal feeling that you didn't get in many places on the radio. And I think podcasting brings forth that same communal feeling. You feel the same way about podcasters as I think that, the fans of someone like Howard feel about him, that they're someone they know and rely on to listen to on a regular basis.
I've got a few questions that came in from people as suggested questions to ask you. So let me go through these and try to word these as best I can. A lot of different podcasters are doing different things to help promote and draw in listeners. Which ones have you thought worked well, and which ones have just turned you off and made you run away?
Well, in terms of discovering a show, from my point of view as a listener, most of the new podcasts I've discovered, I've either heard mentioned on another podcast that I was already listening to, either in the form of a promo or in the form of just, a topic of discussion on the show. Occasionally I'll read a news article that'll mention a podcast. I mean, that was of interest, like I mentioned. That's how I discovered EarthCore originally. The directories, of course, when I first started listening to podcasts, it was pre-iTunes support, and I was using iPod or Lemon, and Podcast Alley I would go to frequently and look at the top 10 or even the top 100 and see what captured my attention in that regard. In terms of, finding shows, that's mostly how I've found podcasts that I've come across and subscribed to as a listener. I mean, I think at this stage of the game, the most effective promotion seems to be getting exposure on other podcasts so that you can tap into their existing audience. And if you get exposure in a podcast where you have a like-minded audience, it's highly likely that someone like me will say, wow, well, I like this show, and this show sounds like fun too. I'll check that one out as well. Certainly exposure in the directories is good, but there's a lot of clutter there, and it's hard to get a sense of a podcast just from glancing at the listing on the directory. I think you get a much better sense when you hear someone else talk about it or give a little taste of it. Some of the promos that people have been doing, and your show plays a lot of promos, Daily Storyscope plays a lot of promos, and a lot of times the promo can be effective. At least for me, that's been an effective way to get me to look for a particular podcast.
Are there certain things that podcasters do or don't do that, as a listener, irritates you?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest pet peeve is, I think, similar to one of your pet peeves, and it has to do with tagging. A lot of podcasters don't tag and label their shows with an understanding or thinking about how a listener listens to those shows. And I'll give you, very specific examples. The aggregators do a great job of collecting shows, and this is true whether it's iTunes or iPod or Lemon or whatever you're using, but they don't organize them necessarily the way you want to listen to them. So what I would always do is create a playlist, and I would drag my podcasts, as they are, as I download them, the current ones, into that playlist, mark them off as read in the aggregator, or listen to in the aggregator so they don't keep showing up, and then I drag that playlist into whatever iPod I was using at the time, first a Shuffle and a Mini and a regular iPod, and now I actually sync several iPods for different places I am with the same playlist. The problem is if they're not tagged right, the shows don't show up in chronological order on the playlist, and that to me is the most aggravating thing, because when I listen to them, I want to catch up with the show. So if I've missed a few episodes and I download them maybe twice a week, I want to capture 3 or 4 episodes, and then I want to catch up, and I want to catch up in order. So even, no offense to Adam, because I like the show very much, but Daily Source Code, for example, he names the show Daily Source Code for Monday, Daily Source Code for Tuesday, Daily Source Code for Wednesday, and then the date afterwards. Well, what happens when you put that in a playlist is it ends up that Wednesday's show, Friday's show appears before Wednesday's show, because F becomes before W in the alphabet. So you all of a sudden have 3 or 4 daily source codes in your playlist, but they're not at all in chronological order. Your show, of course, Rob, shows up perfectly. But other podcasts just put the title, and the title is some funny title that they made up for that show. And so they're all over the place. Even the Wall Street Journal, actually, the Wall Street Journal's little daily technology news update, they just put the title of the update. So if it's, stocks take a dip, it shows up down in the S's. If it's, eBay makes an announcement, then it's up in the E's. So the same day's news, because they put out, 4 or 5 of these a day, little, short snippets, they might be spread all over your playlist. So very hard to listen to them when they're current, when that happens. So, I think a lot of shows don't tag them so that they show up conveniently in a playlist if the listener is dragging them into a playlist. And I have to believe I'm not the only one who does that, because it's much easier to stay current and keep track of your podcast that way. Obviously, I spend much too much time listening to podcasts.
Yeah, what is it that makes podcasting such a big part of your life?
Being a bit of a gadget geek and being involved in my whole career in entertainment and technology, I always need stimulation. I'm one of those people that constantly has something on, whether it's in the background or in front of me, and always multitasking. So I like to, I like information. I like to keep learning. So I like to listen to new things, listen to news, listen to this, listen to that. So radio didn't do it as well as podcasting does, quite frankly, because, the majority of the time spent listening to commercial radio is somewhat wasted, either wasted by the repetition of most commercial stations, or wasted by the commercials they have to listen to in most commercial stations, or wasted by the lack of diverse content. So with podcasting, there's so much diverse, fresh content, and you have so much control over what you listen to, that if you're someone like me who likes to constantly have information thrown at them because they learn stuff from it, podcasting is the perfect vehicle, because I can do it when I'm, jogging at the gym, or riding my bike, which I do a lot, or taking a walk, walking the dogs, driving to work, hanging out, online somewhere. It really becomes the ideal companion for someone who's somewhat addicted to constant streams of information.
In your opinion, what do you see that makes a good podcast in terms of content or delivery or production, or even the personality of the podcasters? What is it that attracts you to what you consider a good show?
Well, I think that with any, entertainment vehicle, which ultimately this is, content is still king, and content is probably more important than production value. But production value is important, because eventually you'll get turned off to a show, even if it's got good content, if everything is muddled and it's difficult to hear. But the converse is not as true. In other words, great production values cannot overcome good content. Good content can overcome bad production values. They don't go hand in hand. Truth is important. People have to be honest, and I think that's sort of always been true in radio and sort of audio type entertainment, because it's not a visual medium, and you don't have the benefit of special effects and a lot of the post-production techniques that go into television. I think people expect audio entertainment to be more real. And I think that when you have a show that's being hosted by someone, you have to have a sense of reality and truth to that person. If you believe that they believe what they're doing, even if they're doing something that's fictional and entertainment. You have to believe that they're a real person who's really committed to it. And I think podcasting is good for that because people aren't necessarily getting paid to do it. So there are very few people in podcasting who are doing it because it's a job, in the classic job sense. Oh my God, this is my job. They're really doing it because it's something that they have, whatever their topic of the show is something that they have a real interest in, a passion for, enough to get them to go through the trouble and the hard work of putting a decent show together. And I think when that comes through to the listener, that show comes off as a quality show. Even if the sound isn't as great, if the podcaster is real and there's a sense of truth and honesty and integrity to what they're doing, I think that comes across very well to the listener.
Any last parting words of wisdom?
I think, as someone who always gets excited about new technology and gadgets and everything else, this is a great melding of the advances in devices in terms of all these enormous amounts of storage and sound capabilities with the ability for anyone to get in the game. I mean, the fact that there is a very low barrier to have a podcast means that anyone with talent, and there's an enormous amount of talented people out there who don't, get to be on the traditional media platforms, and this is a wonderful venue for them. And if more and more listeners like myself can discover those talents, I think it's great.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being part of our 100th show, and thank you for your advice and your perspective from the listener's point of view.
Well, thanks, Rob. First of all, congratulations to you for putting on such a great show for so many episodes, and it's really a pleasure to have the chance to talk to you.
Well, folks, that concludes our interview with Jeff, a podcast listener. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you would like me to interview any other podcast listeners in the future. Call and leave a message at 206-666-HELP or send an email to podcast411@gmail.com. Coming up at the end of today's episode, we'll be playing a promo from a View from the Couch podcast, so please stick around for that. And I have another congratulatory audio clip that was sent in, and this one is from Griddle Cakes Radio. We're going to play that here first, then come back with some news and notes and send you on your way. Here we go.
Hey, Rob. Ron from Griddle Cakes Radio here. I have a special guest who'd like to wish you a happy 100th. Take it away, Grandpa.
Hi, Rob.
A little closer to the microphone.
Hi, Rob. Is that better?
Yep, go ahead.
Rob is one centenarian to another. I just wanted to say, happy birthday.
Oh, Grandpa, he's not 100. This is his 100th.
He's not? How old is he?
Oh, I don't know. I think he's close to my age.
Your age? Ha! I've got hemorrhoids older than that.
Yeah, okay, Grandpa. Just talking to the mic
like this?
and say, Rob.
So why are we congratulating him?
It's his 100th podcast.
What's a podcast?
It's sort of like a radio show.
Oh, you mean like Inner Sanctum or The Lone Ranger or Fibber McGee and Molly?
Not exactly. Grandpa, just speak into the mic and say, happy 100th,
Sometimes
Rob.
I just don't understand you kids.
Tell you what. As soon as we finish here, I'll take you down to that pub that you like so much, and the beer's on me.
Happy 100th podcast, Rob. I just love your podcast. It's great. I never miss it. I hope you have 100 more. How was that?
Excellent.
Let's go. I'm thirsty.
Yes, sir.
You think that cute waitress will be there? She was checking me out last time. I'm telling you, if I was 50 years younger...
Seriously, Rob, thanks for all that you do. Your podcast has helped many of us get started, and I'm sure there will be many more to follow. Thanks again, men, and congrats.
Well, Ron and Grandpa, thank you for that audio clip. Greatly appreciated. And, of course, there will be links in the show notes to Griddle Cakes Radio. Most importantly, out of today's show, I would like to thank you, the listeners, for being part of the show. This show cannot happen without other podcasters and without you, the listeners, interacting. I encourage you to leave feedback. Let me know what you think, what you'd like to hear on the show. 206-666-HELP or podcast411@gmail.com. I love to get your feedback. I love to hear what you're thinking and what you'd like to see, where you'd like to see the show go. On our next show, I just want to let you know, it will be an interview with Mark from the Tartan Podcast, and that will be show number 101, and that's going to be on Wednesday, November 2nd. There will not be a show on Monday. I'll explain more next week. I'd also like to mention that on Tuesday, On Love House Radio, there'll be an interview of me. So for those of you that voted to hear me be interviewed, you get a chance to hear that on Love House Radio. Again, I'll have a link to that. PD interviewed me over there on that show. Very good show. That's going to go ahead and do it for us today. As always, this is Rob from Podcast 411 reminding you to listen different.
A View from the Couch.
When danger strikes, there's only one podcast that puts your needs above their own.
John has sent me out into the perilous storm to try and get some sounds from Hurricane Katrina. And I'm out here like a moron in the rain.
Bravely using our own bodies to try out medical procedures, both ancient and cutting edge.
A cervical neck stretcher. I'm putting that on now. I'm now doing the Velcro straps around my forehead, which is very similar to what they would use like for a crazy person to hold them in the bed.
And let's not forget the entertainment beat.
It's evil robot propaganda.
Check out more of View from the Couch at Boodalicious.net.